Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Welcome back, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. Make sure you check out Wild West Hackin' Fest, wildwesthackinfest.com, put on by Black Hills Information Security. There'll be lots of awesome speakers there and hands-on hardware hacking. Many of us from Security Weekly will be speaking there, wildwesthackinfest.com. Michael, what do we got in... Oh, I wanted, if I could, start off with talking about this great show that I found called $1 Million Genius. It's on the History Channel, and it basically chronicles people who had an idea and took it from like starting on their own, dumping a bunch of money into it, essentially a startup, and brought it to market and were successful. And there's like 2 or 3 different stories in every episode. They've got one season that's currently out there, and some of the stories are more interesting than others. The one that really jumped out at me, other than you should get the head shaver, Michael. It's called Headblade. You should totally get that. Like, I'm going to shave my head with this just because it looks so cool. Right. But the most compelling story was the whistle. And there was a guy who was a referee for basketball, college basketball, actually got really good at refereeing and did Olympics and stuff. And on 2 separate occasions, his traditional pee whistle, the one with the little ball in it, failed on him. And there's a couple of different ways they would fail. If you blow too hard, the pee gets stuck and no sound is made. And it turns out when you're in a sporting event and you're a referee that has a whistle, that's really important that your whistle works because people think you blew the call and didn't call a foul when there should have been a foul. And that happened, I believe it was like an Olympic basketball game. And he's like, I really thought I was going to die. Like, it was in Brazil. The crowd rushed onto the floor. He was getting trampled. And he was like, at that moment, he's like, I was my passion to create a better whistle. And we've talked about situations like this all the time, Michael, where you're like, I'm just going to make something better. Like, sure, there's whistles that people have used for a long time. And he did all this research about the different sounds, and there's 3 pipes, and then he had to figure out how to bend them so that it could be in the form of a whistle. And he did that, and then he had to sell it. Or actually, before that, he had it manufactured, and it basically wasn't working. Like, it fell apart, and the manufacturing wasn't precise enough to make the whistle. And he got so mad that he slammed his phone down. It was one of those old school telephones, the ones with the plastic that like you could go through metal. And he slammed the phone down, and it bounced back up and hit him in the face. He picks the phone back up. He calls his engineer. He's like, "What's this phone made out of?" And they found that plastic, and that's what they make the whistle out of, which I thought was like a really cool part of his story. And so he goes to all the sporting goods stores, and no one wants to buy it. No one. Like, not one. He went to like 30 different stores all across the country. Not one sale. So he goes to a conference to referee. I don't know if it was an Olympic event, but he's in a hotel with 200 other referees. And I'm not saying that people should do this in security. It's a bad idea. But he walked out into the hallway at 2 o'clock in the morning where there was 200 referees sleeping and blew the whistle as loud as he could. They came out. He's like, I thought they would be really mad, right? It was very risky. But they came out and they're like, where'd you get that whistle? I want one. And started taking orders the next day. Now, Fox 40 whistle is the de facto standard for every single major sporting event, every different kind of sport. Everyone uses the Fox 40 whistle. It's a pretty freaking cool story. right?
That's a really cool story.
And there's lots
I like
of things.
some of the risks in it.
Yeah, lots of parallels to what we've talked about in the show. Selling to the right audience was the most glaringly obvious one, right? Like he had this awesome thing. He was just selling it to the wrong audience. His target market was just completely wrong. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you think about it now being the de facto, so out of that 200, he captures some percentage of them, but then that word of mouth spreads, right? So it's that social proof. It's a smart way to de-risk it. Yeah. He knew what he was talking about. He was struggling to translate that, but he figured out how somebody else saw it, and then once enough people see the value, that translation problem goes away. People will translate it on their own.
Well, also, I think like what's the problem you're trying to solve? Like he had that problem and had some pretty dramatic examples of that problem, which I think is really, as we translate it into a security startup, having a really good personal or dramatic, we've talked about that before, right? Relating it to your personal experiences and having a really good dramatic, like, this is the problem I'm solving, something that people can really grasp onto. And look, I've watched a few episodes of this show, and there's like 6 different startups that they chronicle. That one stuck out in my mind the most, which is why I wanted to mention it on the show. And it's a good show. I mean, if you like listening to Startup Security Weekly with Michael and I and all of our wonderful guests, check out this show. At least a few episodes will kind of give you some really cool stuff to think about and apply to your own startup, right? Like I'm certainly applying some of these lessons to my own startup. But it's interesting because, Michael, they listen to you when they produce the show, by the way. There's the graphic that comes up when they're talking to the entrepreneur, and it says the problem, like in big letters on the screen, the problem, right? And then it talks about like the dark times, right? So it says, like when things weren't, every one of these stories, there was a time where like they were just on the cusp of either make it or break it kind of thing, which, I mean, for TV, they had to, add a little bit of that drama in. But it's awesome. Like they start right with the problem,
I have to tell you, I started asking that question 4 or 5 years ago. Initially, the how tall to ride, the artful thing, it's funny. The how tall to ride is what everybody remembers. But I got counseled early on that I really needed to ask about readiness. And I deliberated on that. And what I always kind of find fascinating is people still remember it as how tall to ride. So I still ask it that way. Yeah. But the question really is about readiness. But what problem? That's always been in my vernacular, but the last 4 or 5 years, I've really focused on it. And it's kind of fascinating how many places you see that popping up. And what I find more fascinating is that it's really easy to ask, but it doesn't make it any easier to answer. Right. So I love shows like this. I told somebody the other day, we got rid of, so when I say we got rid of our televisions, we canceled our cable subscription, but in our neighborhood, you get a basic subscription just for living here. So we're not cut off from the world. I did cancel Netflix. I do have Amazon Prime, and frankly, I'm waiting for that to get to the Apple TV finally to simplify my life. But we don't watch a lot of TV. But if you ask me what things I'll watch, I will watch business improvement shows. I'll watch, I didn't know about this one. Totally on the list. Totally something I would watch.
You can watch all these episodes online too, Michael. Looks like
I dig Forged in Fire, also on the History Channel. I like some of their stuff. But even that, like what I find kind of fascinating is that, as you suggested to people, there are parallels in all of this. James was talking about something like, security's not. We want it to be new, but it's not. It doesn't have to be new. And especially when you're looking at this, there's parallels to things. And what I always find is if you can see the parallel and then step back, you're like, oh, it helps. It helps with clarity. Yes, it's for TV. Yes, they amp the drama. Sometimes I don't know. Startups have drama, but
they do.
It's good, and that's why we pick a lot of the stories that we pick and the things that we do. And the first one,
when you watch the episode, Michael, you're going to find a whole new way to shave your head, dude. It's going to be.
I'm looking forward to it already.
You're going to want one.
All right, I'm in. I just went through a whole experiment of trying out different razors to see what I would or wouldn't like. So we'll add this in the experiment.
Maybe you'll have to report back and try this this new one that I saw.
I'll see if my life has been changed or not.
Life changing.
What do you think about snakes?
I don't have a phobia of snakes, but I don't particularly like snakes. Like I wouldn't have one as a pet. I have screamed like a little girl when a snake sneaks up on me kind of thing, but I don't have like a phobia towards them.
Yeah. You know what? I'd say it the same way. No phobia, but if I see one, I'm happy to give it its space and go the other direction.
Yeah.
More like Indiana Jones with it, like snakes.
Yeah, like
it
if
had
I
to be
see
snakes.
a snake, I'm like, oh, that's cool. But like one time I was in my garage and I turned around and there was like a snake like staring at me, and I screamed like a little girl. So,
Yeah.
I'll admit that.
I would probably do the same thing.
Most people would. He caught me off guard, It's
So there's this concept of dead snakes as projects that will take you down. And so I had to read the title because it's the title, Don't Play with Dead Snakes, Kill Projects Before They Kill You. And what I thought was kind of interesting was there are these problematic ideas. There's things in your business that distract you. And it's something I've been looking at a lot lately because as I focus more on value proposition, I say, what problem are you trying to solve? If you want to give me a laundry list of problems, you're trying to do too much. Something that has been really ingrained in me in the last year or so is find one thing, focus on it. I think I've shared this with you before, but in case I haven't, I went to an event. This is maybe going back 11 years. And I remember the person saying, just do one thing. And I was like, yeah, but I can do this and this and this. And he's like, yeah, no, listen, that means nothing to everybody. Do one thing. And he kind of explained it as like, you can still do all those other things. I just want you to focus on one thing, be better than everybody else. Because then when you get into the organization, if they want you to do, you can do more. But if you're known as the jack of all trades, master of none, or however you want to categorize that, you're not really going to go anywhere. What I've been looking at is the upsampling of that, or the other way to look at it is a lot of times in an organization, especially if you're working with clients, and we've talked about that challenge of, well, what features do you include in the roadmap and how does that work? I'm starting to notice a lot of the folks that I'm working with and talking with, they have a lot of opportunity, and so they're not sure sometimes which to go for. And so they either go after a lot of it or they go after very little of it because they're not certain on it. And that's kind of what this article is about. It's basically saying, don't play with dead snakes. If it's a feature that doesn't really work or it's a project that's not really yielding you benefits, and I'm going to add a third part, it's a client that, yeah, they're giving you money, but it's not a good value exchange and it doesn't feel right, you've got to stop doing that stuff. So this is another call to get focused. There's a couple pieces to this that I like that I wanted to call out, and there's a couple pieces that I think are really interesting, and I'm struggling with if I want to suggest it or not. So I'll just put it out there, and I'm curious what you take on it and what other people take on it. And as always, guys, Paul and I read the feedback. So if you've got something, send it to us. We'll take a look at it. The big thing I liked about this was it talked about getting a bias toward action. So they basically said, look, if you want to get rid of dead snakes and bad projects, you've got to let people have that bias for action. Let them go after it. Let them do it. Let them get hot on it. But you've got to give them some parameters to say, how will you know if it's working or not? And if it's not, drop it. Drop it like it's hot. And I'm not going to punish you for it. And that's always the trick. So the thing that this doesn't talk about here that I think is important is you've got to understand. I've learned to start asking clients something really simple. What's your tolerance for testing something new? Is it time? Is it money? Is it number of people involved? And if you like something when you try it new, where do you go from there? How quickly do you decide it's not working? Because sometimes you might decide too quickly. I think those questions need to be dealt with here in some particular level. But I like that because that way you're always evaluating something, and it's not evaluating the person. I think that's always the trick, right? It's evaluating the thing and saying, yeah, it's good, let's keep going. Or, no, all right, we tried it. Yeah, it didn't work. So I like that a lot. Now, the other part to this, it was talking about ways to recognize the dead snake, which I actually kind of liked. If you're using the word strategic a lot to justify the work, yeah, that means you're not really sure how to explain it. There's no line item in your financial plan, which means you didn't convince anybody of its value, but you want to hold on to it because maybe you're really convinced of the value. Maybe you really like it. Maybe you're tied up in emotionally if this is a failure or you a failure. They got a line here, you're pushing rope. To me, that's just friction, right? So here's what it says. You're going above and beyond to communicate the value proposition. The velocity of communication is dropping. Yeah, it's friction. People aren't showing up. They're not listening. They're tuning out. And a lot of times, you end up yelling louder or crying or whining or acting. Yeah, if you see the drop it, it's not really working the right way. Now, here's one of the things that they do, and I thought this was interesting. So they have people do weekly letters. So this is the part that I'm not in love with. But each direct C-level report writes a letter that is due to me no later than 5:30 a.m. every Sunday morning. So here's where I'm torn. I don't like working on weekends anymore. This is a new thing for me, and now that I've adopted it, I find I'm much more productive during the week. I'm not sure at this stage that I could feel comfortable asking somebody else to give up part of their weekend. Here's the flip side, though. If you're telling me you want me to take 20 to 30 minutes on the weekend to reflect on the week past, summarize that back to me, I'm also not against that. Like I think getting a day of distance and having a little time to take a look at it and doing something quick, I like it. Now, here's something else I like, and this might surprise people. It's not really structured. I love structure. Look, if you want substance and you want to reveal good substance, the answer is almost always structure. What I like about this is he's like, look, tell me what I need to know. Like, lay it out for me. And I like that. And then what he does is he reviews all of these, and then he combines them into a note that he then sends out to everybody. And then it sets up their conversations for Mondays. Now, this is why I'm also kind of on the fence. I like that. Like, do I want somebody to read stuff on Sunday? Do I want to be the reason? No. Are we already all checking our messages on Sunday night? Yeah, for the most part. And with a lot of the work that I do with people, we structure some questions for them in advance, and that gives them time to reflect on it. I review all the responses. I build it into a workbook. I share it with them, and then we go and we discuss it. And you know what happens? It's great because we've primed the pump. So that basically means everybody's thought about it. They've shared it. He's reviewed it, asked some questions, put some stuff back out. Everybody gets a chance to see what everybody else said. So by the time you come to the meeting, you're actually prepped for it. I love that. So on one hand, I really like this as a process. And to be fair, I don't see a better way to do it. Like, well, just do it on Monday. That's not going to work. But there's a little piece of me going, ooh, would I suggest? And the reality is, yeah, I ultimately probably would. Anyway, I like it. There's one little piece to this, though, that I think is really important. He talked about all hands meetings. And he said, look, at the CEO, you need to explain the company strategy, give guidance on around how you're achieving that strategy, show how you're performing against those goals, and explain any significant changes, especially if something got started or something got shut down. Yeah, just so we're clear, that's back to value prop, right? What problems are you solving? What value do you create? What impact do you have? And how are you doing that? Who are you serving? How are you going to market? This is something everybody in the company needs to understand and be comfortable with. And if you're not, and you're in a company, you need to ask that question. P.S. If you're on a security team today, you should ask the same question. Not in a startup, you're on a vendor, you need to ask the same question. This stuff is so fundamentally important. And what I find is if you can't answer those questions, you're probably playing with a lot of what they call the dead snakes. You're working on things, what I usually call it risk catnip. It's fun, it's pleasurable, it feeds your dopamine receptors, doesn't do crap for value. Don't do it, drop it. So what do you think, Paul? I mean, do you see this as a problem, and how would you address it? Do you like this guy's suggestions, or what are your take? What's your take on weekends?
Yeah, weekends are great. I mean, weekends are fun. Sunday's my fun day, something like that. But I think in early on in my career, we were just talking about this in a show we did yesterday with Doug White, and companies and leaders of the companies and employees of the companies, we collectively have to make decisions. And sometimes, as the article is pointing out, like, that's not the right decision. And when you figure that out, is kind of scary because, like you're saying, Michael, it can go too far. The example I gave is when I first transitioned from college into a full-time position, company I worked for, I was the IT manager, and the company I worked for was looking at changing their CRM and sales and ordering system, right? And they chose this new technology. Everyone, and I think we pushed it too far, right? Everyone got training. All our data was imported into the new system. We started running it in parallel and realized it just wasn't the right fit. Not that the technology was bad. It just wasn't the right fit for the way that everyone operated on a daily basis, and we had to back out and go back to the old system. That cost the company a lot of money, and people a lot of time, which is in business is money, and maybe recognizing that earlier on, and so that ended up being my first kind of experience with a large scale dead snake, like you're talking about, Michael. And those are just some of the most difficult problems. It translates into startups, especially security, as we're intimately familiar with. Let's go try and solve a problem this way. How far down that path do you go before you realize, that wasn't the right way to solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the real takeaway, right? It's you need to recognize that if you're in a startup, your time is precious, your focus is precious, your energy is precious, and so and I keep having this conversation, and I understand it because I had to have the conversation with myself for a decade before I figured it out. The sooner you can figure out your focus and your niche, and you can execute against it ruthlessly, the sooner you can do all those other things you're thinking about. It's. I wish somebody had maybe said that to me a decade ago. Michael, I'm not saying you can't do all these other things. What I'm saying is you can't do them all at the same time. Pick whatever you're best at, that the marketplace wants today, where you're really going to go make a name for yourself or drive the revenue or whatever else it is, and go execute against that ruthlessly. And then, yeah, in your other cycles, sure, test some of this stuff. But put some limits on it and evaluate it ruthlessly. Figure out how you're going to collect the data on it. Make those decisions, and you're good to go. And P.S. I finally figured it out, and yeah, totally worth it. So I'm going to keep bringing up stuff like this. This was a neat way of thinking about it, and the article is good. It's got a lot of gems in there, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of the other ones. I threw in an article on intellectual property. We talked about intellectual property a couple times now. Yep. This one was on copyright and copyright law, as opposed to last time we did trade secrets. A couple of things I just want to point out here that I really like. Copyright, and this covers it all. I thought this was exceptionally well written, which is why I wanted to promote it. Copyright covers the expression of an idea. So you'll see a lot of people say, well, we're talking about it. It's copyrighted. Nope, doesn't work that way. A couple other things about copyright that are interesting. You can transfer your copyrights. People say, what do I have to do to get the copyright? The good news is nothing. Now, you'll hear stories about songwriters that mailed themselves copies of their songs, right? Yeah. Which is the poor man's reason, or the poor man's method, as opposed to getting it registered with Library of Congress. You don't have to do any of that stuff. But if somebody else wants to come later and levy a claim against you, if you have more protections because you registered or did whatever, you're better off. But, you snap a picture, congratulations, you're the copyright holder. You write a document, congratulations, you're the copyright holder. Here's a caveat. If you do work in the consulting business or you work for a company, you may have in your agreement that you're transferring the copyright to them. It's a work product, and you don't have rights to it or ownership to it. And they have that. And to be fair, for most cases, it's not a big deal. Sometimes it is a big deal.
Well, and sometimes the company, like I believe it was it HP that relinquished to Steve Wozniak some of the ideas around the personal computer.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's stories that go back like that, where they can relinquish control of any idea that you do while working for the company, which is always a good idea to point that out. Also, some of the things that we do for Security Weekly is you can attach different forms of, they're not necessarily copyrights, right? There's copyleft, there's Creative Commons. So you can define the license for your content. For example, and it's hard in the podcasting, but anytime we have the opportunity, we tag things with a certain license, right? We basically say, hey, we're putting this out there in the public. You're free to share it and use it as you see fit, but Creative Commons, you can specify certain things, like they can't modify it in any way, shape, form, or fashion. You have to share it as we published it, and you can't make any money off of it, right? So you can specify all that, and Creative Commons allows you to define all that, and there's different versions. So if you are generating content, be strategic about it would be my advice, and apply the correct copyright. Maybe you do want to have a copyright of it, and as Michael said, you pretty much organically get that, but you can change that depending on what your content is.
The last little piece on this is interesting, and we don't have to get deep into it, but people want to know how long it lasts. If you've created it after 1978, it is 70 years. Oh, it's life of creator plus 70 years. So live long, and then it's 70 years after that. Disney, because of Walt Disney, drove a lot of our current changes in copyright. And if it's beforehand, there's a chart, and it's all sort of different. I might be remembering this incorrectly, but there's also whether it was created by an individual or created by a corporation. I know there's so there are some stuff to it, but the short answer is long time. This stuff lasts a long time. So it's interesting to think about if you're creating stuff. Broader, when we look at this, I think I've said this before, I'm just going to say it again. I still, and I've looked at Creative Commons and other stuff. A lot of times I'll still stick a copyright on a lot of the stuff I create. A lot of the reason I do that is mostly what you said, Paul, just so somebody else doesn't take my stuff and run with it. Right. But, a lot of people have asked me over the years, like, how are you going to protect? What are you going to, and my answer has been simple. I'm going to give it away. I think that's a great protection for it.
Right.
Over time, I might be proven wrong. So it's kind of cool. On that theme, this is why I threw this in, the Uber-waymo lawsuit. I liked the subheading to it. It should be easy to poach talent, but not IP. Yep, that's what I liked. And I just kind of want to put it in there because it doesn't really matter to me if you're in startup land and you've followed this or not. There's a lot around, this is all around self-driving and whether, in fact, I would say if you get more into the details on it, it's whether somebody acted on their own to poach IP or whether they were instructed. And I'll tell you, I've seen this happen in our security space where, you go out on a job interview with another company just to see what you can see, just to see what you can learn about them. Or they're hiring you and they say, hey, before you leave, if you brought over a copy of X, Y, and Z, that'd be great. We'd really like that. And those things, those are bad. Now, what I've also seen, though, and this is kind of what this is coming to, is there's some really restrictive stuff that's like, if you leave our company, you can't work in this industry for at least 2 years and you can't work with any clients or competitors, or if they ever looked at a red car one time, they're excluded. And you're like, wait, what? And so what they're kind of saying here is, all right, look, your intellectual property should stick with the company. We get that. But, when it comes to workers, when it comes to talent, when it comes to stuff, there needs to be a different path. I've often felt that way. I've never been comfortable with overly restrictive agreements on employment, but when it comes to protecting your property, I've been equally vocal about why I think that that's really important. So, P.S., if you've left a company and you take your whole list of contacts and all the documents you've created, that's IP theft. Unless your agreement specifies that you're able to do it. And we see a lot of people say, oh, but I'm justified. It's mine. I created it. That's probably not what your employment agreement says.
Right.
So it was just more of just a high-level thought on that. And here's why it matters for startups. Paul, you and I see a lot of startups that they're in stealth mode. I mean, I can't even tell you what I'm doing. Oh, stop. You're not in stealth mode. Yeah, I mean, you are. You feel like you are, and I don't mean to be so dismissive to it, but that's the kind of stuff that leads to these overly restrictive agreements and stuff. My opinion is hire smart people, create a clear vision, right? And that clear direction, that stuff we keep talking about. Then let the smart people do really smart things. And I think you work out. I don't think you need a lot of agreements are good. Clarity on protecting intellectual property, good. Trying to lock people up so they'll never go anyplace else. What kind of workforce are you creating? But right. I mean, what's your take on it?
Well, I think startups, specifically in this case, need to protect their intellectual property. In terms of an employee, you should protect it in that they just can't take your secret sauce patented technology and go somewhere else. However, if they do, and you do have a patent, there are some protections there. And you do have the protections of copyright as well. So, there are some inherent protections. Overly restricting your employees just really doesn't work. In my experience, in all fairness, like when employees either come from a competitor or go work for a competitor, they're typically not taking something they've created and just implementing it, right? They're taking their knowledge and they're recreating it in a new environment. And I think most people have, and most companies have that understanding and don't restrict or don't enforce, like you can't go work for a competitor kind of thing. And there are obviously going to be exceptions to that rule as well. But even, I don't know if it was this show we talked about it, but the people that were at the heart and soul of Cisco, left and did their own thing. So, I think large part there's a lot of freedom in terms of when you leave. However, there are exceptions to that, certainly. But, I think protecting your IP, again, I think there's natural protection, inherent protections, and then, you just got to be reasonable. It also, you shouldn't piss off your employees either. I think that's also a really good lesson.
Yeah, and, I think you've pointed out a really subtle point. I'm apparently not so artful today. You have protections. Use the protections that you have, use them wisely, be clear on what they are, which is why we brought some of them up. And then beyond that, just go create value, go do good stuff, create value, hire smart people, go do it. And you're right. It's that concept of know-how. I actually write into my agreements that the know-how is mine. Like for people who want a license to work product or they want to own the work product, I'm always happy to do that. But one of the things I put in there is the know-how methods and any improvement of know-how methods, those are still mine. That's what makes me, and that's what helps me do this stuff. And I'll be upfront. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations with legal folks. And when you finally break down and explain it and say, look, I don't want to be restricted. I'm not going to restrict you. And I might do something similar again. People are like, okay, cool. Like they get it, at least from my perspective. I think, as you just said, be reasonable. P.S. What's reasonable? I don't know. Sit down and talk with people, but don't make it a surprise later, right? Don't be a jerk about it. So that was more the point. I was less concerned about what's happening with Uber and Waymo and more about, what kind of conditions are we setting for people? Explainer videos. I just put this in. You and I have talked about them a little bit, and I think there's some value in explainer videos, whether they're fabulous or not. I think it has the Dollar Shave Club one in here. Yeah, I mean this was hysterical. By the way, that company was sold for what, $1 to a couple billion. Like it went out really well. There's a lot of examples in here. So why I put this in here is I've started noticing that if I take briefings and I say, hey, so what do you guys do? Like what problem do you solve? If I've got 18 minutes and can take notes and draw my own map, I might figure it out. What's great about explainer videos is you got to get the story down. You got to get it down tight. And when I used to do more improv, we used to have an exercise where, it's you play the game, right? You build out the scene, and then the same actors, you take like a minute break, and then so let's say the scene was a 3-minute scene. Okay, boom, time, done. Now do the scene again, but you got 45 seconds. Boom. Okay. Do the scene again. Now you've got 60 seconds. Boom. Do the scene again. Now you got 30 seconds. Now you got 15 seconds. And it's funny because by the end, I mean, you're just being slapstick, but what it proves to you in that process is there's always something you can cut out. You can get down to the essence of it. And so what I liked about this was somebody else went through, curated a list. There's a couple in here that I really liked, that give you some insight. Some are funny, some are really just explained well, some are animated, some have all sorts of different styles. And so I use this as a way that you can take a look at it and say, if I was going to explain what we do, if I was going to create a single video to explain it, what would that look like? Mm-hmm. And, for me, I kind of looked at it and said, gosh, I should probably do this for both straight talk and value proposition. In fact, I feel like taking the last couple of days off, I'm almost confident I talked about this concept a couple times. So much for vacation for me. But
I like the list. I think explainer videos can have a positive impact for you. I like the Spotify one because I actually recently just evaluated all those music services, and I really do like Spotify as one of the top ones. And yeah, they don't get into the details in their video, but they certainly hit it at a high level, right? It's like your music everywhere. And that's what I liked about Spotify was on my Linux laptop, on my Android phone, on my Apple devices, on my Mac, whatever I'm using, I can use Spotify, and I actually have a client, and it's nice, and they did a nice job with it. The other bonus is they've got a high-quality option as well, which isn't the best quality out there, depending on how fickle you are about that. But in terms of all the streaming music services, I found it to be the best quality, so...
Well, you hinted at too. They were able to explain the problem in a way that resonated with you, and they didn't have to give you the total solution. All they had to do was explain that they had a solution to it in a way that got you to say, tell me more.
Right.
That's an explainer video. One of the challenges we see a lot of people when they make the explainer videos is they say, well, let me explain all the features and benefits, and let me tell you how we do it. No. Right? Go back to value prop. What problem do you solve? What value do you create solving that problem? And what's the impact? That's it. Lay that out. Lay it out for me really well. Get me excited about it. And that's it. Boom. Move on. This other story I threw in here, because we've got a lot of security stuff that happened over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's called Invisible Unicorns. 35 big companies start with little or no money. MailChimp's on there. Lynda's on there. Lynda is the one that is now the education arm of LinkedIn. They got paid $1.5 billion to this. And it just got started as somebody saying, hey, I can go produce some training and some training quality stuff. So here's what I liked about it. You're going to recognize most of these names if you could take a look at it, including Shutterstock, Simply Safe, Tough, Mutter. Sensi is on there. There's a few that I didn't know. Wayfair. I mean, you can't watch the shows we watch without getting a couple of those. Here's the thing. You don't have to have a ton of money to get started and have a big exit. So that's the only reason I was putting this in there. There's some interesting stuff in there that you can figure out. The point is, on this program, we're going to keep talking about innovation and ideas and ways to bring them to market. We've been showing people pretty consistently that your only exit is not an IPO. Acquisition could be the way, could turn into a lifestyle business, could turn into all sorts of other things. and therefore you've got that. Last piece I threw in here, this was an extra one because I usually try to do 5. It was the hells of being a founder. And I love this intro. Being a founder is horrible. There, I said it. We're supposed to be visionaries and rebels while being pragmatic and concrete, while being good leaders. And they don't fit into one body who isn't about to explode. And you and I have talked, look, you and I have been honest about this with the people who listen with our journeys. You have high points, you've got low points. You got points where you feel like you couldn't do anything wrong. You got points where you feel like you can't get a damn thing right. And then you've got all those moments in between. And you've got people that are looking at you to make decisions. You've got clients that are calling on you. You've got stuff you've got to get done. And, P.S., you've got a family and you're trying to make it all work. And so what I just thought was that this was really kind of interesting because what it basically said was, okay, it's pretty awesome. And there's some sucky moments to it. But by the way, if you're thinking about doing it, here's some stuff to know. And boom, do it. By the way, let me give you the high notes. Don't fool yourself. So are you trying to do a huge startup or are you trying to build a lifestyle business, whatever? And I liked this line, run a dashboard, not a leaderboard. I don't care if anybody's hyping one thing, do your thing. I couldn't agree with that more. Yep. Right on. Number 2, do one thing well. We've been talking about that consistently, so I'm good with it. The team is the product. I have to tell you, I've believed in this the whole time, and I'm privileged and honored to work with some teams right now where I can tell you, yep. I read this 20 years ago, something around the idea like the optimum number of people to start a team is 5. A lot of science behind it. It's actually why when we do our training, we do breakouts in terms of 5. But what also happens is if you gave me 5 good people that could work well together, a good team, we can solve the problem. We can put the thing in play. There's lots of options there. So I always thought that was good. Investors are not bosses. There's ways that you can fail: economically, health, bitterness, and becoming an asshole, which actually I think they're all fair. Dare greatly. I think you talked about that with the whistle and other stuff. So look, I think it's good. I think it's the kind of thing that if you're a founder today and you're watching our show, you're like, okay, I'm all right. There's some opportunity. I think if you're thinking about doing it, go read this. See how it resonates. I thought it was a good list. Is there anything that stuck out to you? I know I gave it a fairly thorough summary.
Quickly mention B-Sides Uganda. B-Sides Kampala, rather, the first B-Sides in Uganda. The CFP is still open until July 15th, bsideskampala.com. Submit your talk today. Make sure you go check out our newest sponsor, Domain Tools. That's right. Whether they're phishing, hacking, or spying, threat actors use domains and IP addresses to launch their attacks. You can go to domaintools.com/security weekly and find out information about an awesome webcast we're going to do with Kyle Wilhoit and Tim Helming, which you're not going to want to miss. It's going to be, those guys are like awesome rock stars. Very much looking forward to that. So those are our announcements. What do we got we got a lot of startup notes of interest.
There was a lot of stuff happening, and I tried to chunk it into 3 different things. Let me start with we're starting now to see established security vendors create their own funds, their own venture funds, their own associations. So Cloudflare set up a $100 million fund. Trend Micro launched a $100 million fund. Palo Alto launched a $20 million venture fund. But theirs is expecting to collaborate with Greylock and Sequoia Capital. So $20 million is just a starting point, right? And if you look at a lot of the cybersecurity funds that have been launched in the last year to 2 years, they might open with subscription around 100, 150 million. Some of them are oversubscribed. They're closing at 300 million or so. What's kind of interesting, if you remember Will Lin, one of the guests on our program, Will and I did a story at CSO where we talked about venture capital is the new steward of R&D. And one of the points that we looked at was a lot of these large established companies, once you're large and established, you can't really be that innovative because you've got to stay the course in the marketplace for your clients and for your investors and for the marketplace and for everything else. And so what starts to happen then is they're going to look to startups. Startups can do that. I think the second thing that kind of comes into it that I find just as fascinating is I've had, and some of these have been guests on our program, but you talk to enough people in the industry and they'll say things like, well, so-and-so the unicorn, so-and-so the whatever, they're doing something really kind of compelling. But the backroom conversation is, well, how long will it take till Trend Micro goes and buys that technology or builds it themselves, or Symantec or somebody else? And so what we see this week is, look, Cloudflare's in the game, Trend Micro's in the game, Palo Alto's in the game, Symantec acquired Fireglass, Zscaler's getting ready for an IPO. Okay, there you go. So, when everybody keeps saying generically, oh, security's off, stop, folks. Security is not off, but when you start looking at it now, pay attention. The way Trend Micro is going to get their innovation, the way Palo Alto is going to get their innovation, is they're going to go find somebody else. Now, what's interesting to me is the Palo Alto Networks one. They're going to do seed, early, and growth stage companies. So the seed stage, those are the people that are looking for their first round, maybe even their seed funding, right? So not an A. It's angel or seed. It's they're getting started. Usually 250, 500K. Series A we've seen go as high as 15 million, but typically it's going to be in that $1 to $5 million range. Series B can go all sorts of places, but your A, B, that tends to be your early stage, and then your C and beyond, that tends to be your late stage or your growth stage companies. So they're basically saying, yeah, we'll go wherever. What I think is fascinating is these companies are their venture. So if you go out IPO, that's fine for them. But this also sets up a pretty good acquisition perspective, and it gives them insight, and it gets them access to research and development. It gets them access to these types of things. So I'm not really surprised by it. Anything there on those three that you thought were surprising or exciting or? Otherwise?
No, I think it's exciting if you have a security startup or considering a security startup and out there looking for funding, to take funding from an existing security company, I think is pretty cool, because conceivably you would think these companies have knowledge of the space and can help you better, maybe differently than others. So,
and I think that's actually a really good point, because if you look at some of the selling points of the security focused investment funds or the security focused private equity groups and stuff, they've spent time building those relationships and cultivating that knowledge. But Palo Alto says, okay, we'll give you some money if that includes, PS, we know how to go to market, and we know how to operate a channel, and we know how to, this could be really exciting, and I think we're going to see more of it. PS, we've also put this up, right? We know Microsoft is doing this, and they've had a bunch of acquisitions recently, but we also know that other companies like Walmart and Target and others are also setting this up. So it's I think it's an exciting time, and I think that what we're seeing is innovation is shifting. And you've got a lot of different opportunities for it. So I think that's kind of cool. All right, Upstream, they raised $2 million. There's not a lot of information on this. So, is that a Series A? Is that a seed? My sense is it's not a seed. It seems like it's a Series A. It's a little unclear. They're using big data, machine learning, so they're pretty buzzword compliant. Security alerts, automotive industry. Yeah, but there's not a lot of info. Like, I can't tell you what they do. I saw it pop up a couple times. I thought it was interesting. I threw it on. So it's called Auth. It's not Auth0.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to just go back to Upstream for one moment.
Yeah, my bad.
So I bought a new car. It's a GM vehicle. I think it's my first American car, which is kind of interesting. What's interesting about GM vehicles is this particular one and many of their vehicles have Wi-Fi in the car and a 4G connection that you can add to your AT&T account, or there's lots of different ways to activate it. And then you also get a website login and an app that you can basically control your vehicle. You can also unlock it and everything from that app, which is kind of scary to me. So a security startup that is focused on automotive security, I think is great. However, it also begs the question, okay, so GM basically has a bunch of hotspots roaming around and a website and an app. Like, how different from that? How different is that from a non-automotive company, security-wise?
Yeah, I think those are good questions, and those are the questions we need to keep asking. I mean, look, let's take a look at like Auth0. Is it Auth0? Is that how you say it? Auth0?
Auth0, I think.
Okay.
I haven't heard of Auth0.
All right. So they got $56 million in funding. Develops and operates authentication platform that allows developers to implement identity solutions for the applications. Yeah, like no real shocker there, right? Like we're watching people. Identity is still a space that people haven't figured out yet. So cool. They're looking at it from a development side. It seems to me, I mean, they've got some competition. So do you think 56 million in funding, is that a lot? Not a lot? I've never come across them. I mean, have you used them? Have you seen it?
I haven't. I mean, there's a lot of open source solutions for identity and authentication platforms as well. I'm curious to dig into it and see what the commercial companies are offering above and beyond, and what their niche is, right?
Yeah, I agree. Sumo Logic, actually, I have to admit, I was kind of surprised by this. So I came across Sumo Logic a couple years ago, cloud-based log management analytics. So their idea was, instead of trying to do it all on site, we'll ingest it all and we'll do it for you. What always kind of surprised me, or what I was always impressed with Sumo Logic, was they really had their internal ship tight. They were one of the first companies I came across that had a CISO who was externally facing, and she was awesome. Like, really great insights. Everything about it was really tight, and managed to separate out the network and forge the close relationships. It was all really cool. They have $75 million Series F. This is growth stage. Like, this is late stage growth. They've taken on $235.6 million in funding since 2010. And two of those investments have been like 60 to 75, $80 million. So they're far bigger than I anticipated. And so now what you start looking at is, at a Series F, like, what is that? And I couldn't find a lot of details on what that money was going toward. But so now what we know when we start looking at stuff like this is, they've got to be thinking about an exit. Like, this is either who's going to acquire them, or this is how do we go public, or how do we start acquiring other people? So that's something we'll start watching for now. Is what does Sumo Logic do next? Do they start acquiring? Do we start seeing partnerships? Are they forming partnerships with larger companies that might be a way to test the waters? It's a large raise. It's not out of line with some of their others, or this late in the game. We tend to see this in startups, but I was surprised. I didn't realize that they were that big. Symantec acquired Fireglass, undisclosed amount. Now, again, I don't have inside knowledge here, but what I can tell you is, in my experience, when it's a disclosed amount, it's because it's a good win for everybody. When it's an undisclosed amount, it's because basically they beat you down and they picked you up before it was too late. Fireglass, but this points out something else I thought was interesting. Fireglass, so according to Owler, they're a provider of agentless isolation solution that detects and eliminates ransomware, malware, and other phishing threats in real time. Now, it looked like they got about $20 million in funding. It was listed as just a Series A, but that wouldn't necessarily jive. It could be, but here's what I take from this. I'm curious if you read it the same way. Symantec went out and they found somebody that they thought that they could integrate. Let's talk about Symantec's integration. That's an enterprise conversation, but so somebody says, "Oh, we've got the Unicorn, we've got the Silence and the CrowdStrikes and these others, and they're doing these really cool, innovative things, and nobody's like them." And Symantec goes and they get Fireglass. Now, does it do the same thing? No. Could it? Maybe.
Yeah.
Could they buy up other people that do it? Yep.
It's a great integration. There's other. I can't think of it. We've talked about another company that's. I had to dig through their website to figure out exactly what space they're playing in. Each browser session is executed in a secure disposable container. So this is.
So is it sandboxing?
Yeah, but it's network level sandboxing of your browser sessions. There are a couple of companies that are doing this. It's really cool. I don't know how well it works. I haven't talked to anyone that's used it or experimented with it myself, but it's really cool in concept. Rather than doing the isolation on the endpoint, they're doing the isolation in the network and with the browser sessions, it's pretty interesting. I'm curious to hear more about this industry, and I think it could be an industry that another vertical in security that we see grow if one of these players is acquired by Symantec.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, what I found on the enterprise side is that people either love or hate Symantec, a Trend Micro, an IBM, a CA. There's a fifth in there, HP, I guess. But look, the reality is they're huge billion-dollar organizations. They've been successful for most of those 20 years or longer. And what we're starting to see now is that not only are they putting, right, Symantec announced a venture fund somewhere in the last year as well. We covered that. So they're putting this stuff out there. They're looking for these opportunities. They're actively prowling for them. So then if you're one of these new companies, even if you can raise $100 million and get your valuation up to $1 billion, great. By the way, you still have to go dislodge Symantec, who is got the money and the connections to go acquire similar types of technology and integrate it for clients that are already embedded. That's not good or bad. It's just the way things are. And it means then that IPO isn't always your approach. Whereas Fireglass, this may not have been the exit they were hoping for. Plenty of other people that we've chronicled recently, including Hexadite, they are exiting and they're getting great multiples for it because when you exit that way, you're essentially being rewarded for your research and development and being successful in the marketplace. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. The Zscaler stuff, I've seen the company for years. I've seen them at events. I've oddly never taken a briefing with them. And so I didn't really know a lot about what they've done, but so far their funding is at least $148 million. It's an incomplete record. And the sources are suggesting that they're hiring their banks to start shopping around their IPO. I think it's going to be interesting, right? Cloud-based information security firm doing automated threat forensics, malware protection, right? But you see the trend then in a lot of the stuff that we're looking at right now. So that's it. A lot of movement in the space in the last week or two. So the dog days of summer do not seem to hold true in the security space.
Yeah. Well, not a whole lot of product announcements happening recently, I think largely due to Black Hat.
I was just going to ask you.
Yeah, big announcements will come at Black Hat, so it'd be interesting.
Yep. I have started to get, and I always honor the embargoes. I've got some stuff coming to me around new reports people are releasing over the summer, and I'm noticing they're doing that well in advance of Black Hat, so they don't want to get trounced by that news. They want to try to either get on the front end of that cycle or back end of that cycle. So there's some good stuff there. How about your journey, man? I mean, it's the summertime. You kicking back with the kids a little bit?
Yeah, so John and I were on independent vacations at different times, so not a whole lot to report on. I will say that understanding who we're selling to is constantly. I'm reevaluating that now. Based on a lot of different resources from this show and stuff. So.
I might have a resource for you on that. Let me get through it myself this weekend. Something new came across my desk, and if it's useful, I'll point you to it. And of course, I will tell everybody in our audience about it as well. I've been looking at that. That's, by the way, the next step of value prop, right? Once you understand your value proposition, right, the problem you're solving, the value you create, then you have to be able to translate that value proposition to a specific audience or a specific buyer, target, a profile, whatever you want to call it. And that's actually where I've been spending a lot of my time. I've actually started to back off of working weekends, take more time off at nights, go out for more walks, like physically close the door, walk away, get some stuff done. So I'm good. I'm on point. A bunch of people have reached out. If you've reached out to me, I'll help you with some value prop stuff. I have some writing to get done. I've got some sketches. Like I kind of find that I'm in that one of those lulls, Paul, that we talked about, where it's like I'm good. I feel good. I'm a little anxious. I'm a little unsettled, and things are processing in my head. So I'm seeing where in a couple weeks it's like, okay, get back to the grind. But I'm taking a little bit of downtime right now.
Awesome.
So
cool.
It's unusual, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching Startup Security Weekly. That concludes this episode. We'll see everyone next time.